They say your life flashes before your eyes when you die. They don't tell you that when the man who was your life dies, it's his life that flashes before yours, and you're just a footnote in the story. My husband, Robert, was a master of control, and even in death, his ghost was trying to write my final chapter. But he, and the vultures he left behind, underestimated one thing. A porcelain doll, after 50 years on a shelf, is covered in cracks. And through those cracks, the light gets in. This is the story of how I stopped being a footnote and burned the whole book down. If you want to see how a ghost gets exorcised and an empire falls, follow my story, like, share, and hit that notification bell, because the finale is one you won't want to miss. My husband, Robert Sterling, was buried on a Tuesday. The Oregon sky, in a rare act of meteorological honesty, wept a cold, persistent drizzle over the obscenely manicured lawns of Port Blossom Memorial Park. It was the kind of gray, soul-dampening day that seeped right through the fabric of your coat and into your bones. I stood there, a statue carved from black wool, feeling nothing but that invasive dampness. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a scene from a movie, a well-acted but emotionally hollow drama. The air smelled of wet earth and lilies, a cloying combination that threatened to choke me. People murmured condolences, their hands briefly touching my arm, their faces masks of rehearsed sympathy. I nodded, my own face a carefully composed blank. After 50 years of practice, I was an expert at being a blank canvas for other people's expectations. The real performance, the Oscar-worthy display of grief, came from my daughter-in-law, Olivia. Her sobs were theatrical, perfectly timed crescendos that ripped through the quiet dignity of the ceremony. She wasn't just crying, she was projecting sorrow. Her face, a mask of tragic beauty worthy of a silent film star, was pressed into my son David's shoulder. David, my dear, sweet, lost David, just stood there, patting her back awkwardly, his own grief muted and confused, overshadowed by his wife's operatic display. He looked like a man trying to comfort a hurricane. I watched them, and the cold I felt had nothing to do with the June rain. It was the familiar Arctic chill of a carefully constructed lie. Later, at the funeral reception, the performance ended as abruptly as a director yelling, "Cut." We were back in our cliffside home, the house Robert had built not as a home, but as a monument to his success. Its vast windows stared out at the churning Pacific, the gray sea a perfect mirror for the sky. The house had always felt like a fortress, designed to keep the world out and, I had long suspected, to keep me in. As guests milled about, clutching glasses of wine and offering hollow condolences that evaporated into the high-ceilinged rooms, Olivia's grief vanished as quickly as the condensation on the window panes. She found me by the grand piano, a monstrously large Steinway that Robert had insisted upon, but I was never allowed to play beyond simple, pre-approved sonatas. She didn't approach with the gentle deference of a grieving daughter-in-law. She moved like a predator, her black dress sleek and severe, her posture radiating an energy that was anything but mournful. "Elizabeth," she whispered, her voice like ice chips rattling in a crystal glass. It was a conspiratorial tone, as if we were allies in some secret venture. The sound of it made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. I simply looked at her, my hands clasped in front of me, a habit of stillness drilled into me over decades. She gestured vaguely at the opulent room, at the Italian marble fireplace, the priceless, or so I thought, paintings on the walls, the sheer, cavernous space. "We need to be practical," she continued, her eyes scanning the assets, not the people. "David and I have been talking. We've spoken to a realtor, a top man from Portland. This house," she paused, her gaze sweeping over me, assessing me. "It's a fortress. It's an institution. It is far, far too much for you to manage alone." Her words hung in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into the quiet pool of my shock. Manage. I had never been allowed to manage anything. I was a fixture, a piece of the decor, as carefully chosen and placed as the Ming vase in the foyer. "The market in 2025 is peaking, Elizabeth," she said, her voice dropping lower, more intense. "Especially for coastal properties with this kind of acreage. The developer interest is through the roof. We should list it immediately. Strike while the iron is hot." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a compassionate thought for my well-being. It was the first shot in a war I hadn't even known had been declared. Her eyes, the color of a winter lake, were devoid of sorrow, of empathy, of anything but cold, hard calculation. She was looking past me, already mentally redecorating her own future with the proceeds of my life. The familiar dread, a sensation I knew as well as my own breathing, settled back over me. It was the cold, heavy weight of being managed, of being silenced, of having my life arranged for me by someone else. For 50 years, Robert had been the master of my gilded cage. He had held the keys, rattling them softly whenever I dared to dream of the sky. Now the master was dead, his body cooling in the damp Oregon earth, but the heir to the keys was standing right in front of me, and I could already hear them jingling in her pocket. A new warden had arrived to patrol the halls of my prison. And in that moment, staring into Olivia's ambitious, empty eyes, I knew my morning was over. A different kind of grief was beginning. The grief for the battle I now had to fight. The house was a mausoleum of silence after they left. The hollow platitudes of the guests faded, the scent of lilies and baked ham dissipated, and all that remained was the vast, echoing quiet. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words and 50 years of my own subservience. Every creak of the polished floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the giant panes of glass, echoed Robert's heavy, authoritative footsteps. He had been gone for days, but his presence was imprinted on the very air of the place. It was in the precise, almost neurotic alignment of the furniture. It was in the chill that seemed to emanate from the walls, even with the thermostat set to a comfortable temperature. I walked through the cavernous living room, my hand trailing over the cool leather of a Barcelona chair I'd always hated. It was uncomfortable, stylish, and chosen by Robert, like everything else. For 50 years, he had curated my existence as meticulously as he curated his art collection. I was his finest acquisition, his porcelain doll. He'd called me on more than one occasion, usually in front of his important business associates. It was meant to sound like a compliment, a term of endearment, but we both knew what it really meant. A doll is an object. It's meant to be kept on a high shelf, admired for its quiet, unchanging beauty, but never, ever to have a thought or a voice of its own. It doesn't move unless it is moved. It doesn't speak unless you pull its string. I wandered into the library, a room paneled in dark, oppressive mahogany. The air smelled of old paper and Robert's cigar smoke, a scent that clung to the upholstery like a shroud. My eyes fell on a particular shelf of leather-bound classics. I remembered one evening, years ago, maybe 20, maybe 30. The years had a way of blurring into one long gray afternoon. I had been feeling a flicker of something, a tiny rebellion, a desperate need to impose my own will on something, anything. So I had rearranged the books on that single shelf, shifting them from his rigid alphabetical by author system to one organized by color. It was a small, foolish thing, but it felt like a revolution. He didn't come home and yell. Robert rarely yelled. His methods were far more insidious. He came into the library, poured his customary brandy, and his eyes immediately landed on the shelf. A flicker of something, annoyance, disappointment, crossed his face before it was smoothed away into his usual mask of calm authority. He didn't say a word to me. He simply walked over, set his drink down, and with slow, deliberate movements, put each and every book back in its original, precise position. It took him perhaps 5 minutes. When he was finished, he picked up his brandy, took a sip, and finally looked at me, where I stood frozen by the doorway. "Things have their place, Elizabeth," he said, his voice quiet, reasonable, and utterly devastating. "You should remember yours." That was the essence of his control. It wasn't in fists or shouts, but in the slow, methodical, suffocating erosion of my soul. He corrected my grammar at dinner parties. He chose my clothes, laying them out for me some mornings as if I were a child, steering me towards muted beiges and elegant navies, away from the bright yellows or deep reds I secretly loved. He vetted my friendships, finding subtle faults with any woman he deemed too independent or too loud, until my social circle consisted only of the wives of his business partners, women as polished and silent as myself. He discouraged hobbies. My youthful passion for painting was dismissed as a messy, frivolous pastime. The easel my father had given me was relegated to a dusty corner of the attic, a forgotten relic of a person I was no longer allowed to be. Now, standing alone in the suffocating silence of his house, his ghost lingered. It wasn't a shimmering specter in a hallway. It was a habit of fear ingrained in my very being. I found myself walking softly, my feet making no sound on the thick Persian rugs. I caught myself pausing before speaking, even though there was no one in the room to hear me, my mind automatically censoring a thought before it could become a word. I went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea, and my hand hesitated over the cabinet, my brain searching for the brand that Robert had approved of. This was his true legacy. Not the fortune, not the house, but this deep, cellular programming of obedience. My own autonomy felt like a foreign language I'd heard spoken once in a film long ago, a language whose vocabulary and grammar I had completely forgotten. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the man who had taught me to be silent, and I was terrified that I no longer knew how to make a sound. They returned 2 days later, not with the delicacy of a family checking in on their grieving matriarch, but with the calculated efficiency of a corporate raiding party. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway and saw not one, but 2 sleek, dark cars pull up. David and Olivia emerged from the first. From the second, 2 men in sharp, expensive suits. An invasion. They didn't wait for me to open the door, but let themselves in with the key David still had. I met them in the grand foyer, my heart a cold, tight knot in my chest. "Mom," David began, his eyes skittering away from mine, fixing on a point on the wall somewhere over my shoulder. He looked pale, his tie slightly askew, a man deeply uncomfortable in his own skin. "This is Mr. Vance, the realtor Olivia mentioned, and this is Mr. Davies, our family attorney." Our family attorney. Not my attorney. Theirs. The distinction was a razor blade. Mr. Vance, the realtor, stepped forward, his hand outstretched, a smile of predatory charm plastered on his face. He was tan, his teeth too white, his cologne overpowering. "A pleasure, Mrs. Sterling. An absolute honor. This property is a legend." His eyes weren't looking at me, but over my head, cataloging the soaring ceilings, the sweeping staircase, the sheer scale of the wealth he was about to carve a commission from. They herded me not into the comfortable sitting room, but into Robert's study, his inner sanctum, the room that smelled most strongly of him, with its leather chairs and the massive polished mahogany desk that served as a throne. It was a power play, designed to intimidate, to remind me of my place. Olivia orchestrated the whole affair. "Sit down, Elizabeth," she said, her voice dripping with a false, cloying solicitude as she gestured to the smaller, less comfortable visitor's chair opposite the desk. She and David and the lawyer took their places around me, a tribunal. Then came the brochures. Mr. Vance spread them across the gleaming surface of Robert's desk like a winning hand of cards. The glossy paper gleamed under the desk lamp. "Seabreeze Senior Villas," the cheerful, looping script announced. The pictures showed smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard, participating in water aerobics, and dining in a cheerful, sterile-looking cafeteria. It was a vision of a sanitized, managed end of life, a waiting room for the inevitable. "Mom, it's perfect," David mumbled, finally forced to look at me as he pushed a brochure closer. "It's got 24-hour care, social activities. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. No maintenance, no all this." He waved a hand vaguely, encompassing the house, the memories, my entire life. Olivia chimed in, her tone the one a parent uses on a difficult child. "It's not a home, Elizabeth. It's a community. You'd make so many new friends. And it's secure. We'd know you were safe." Safe. The word was a bitter irony in my mouth. I had never been less safe than I was right now. Then the lawyer, Mr. Davies, cleared his throat. He had a face like a clenched fist and a smile that didn't reach his cold, reptilian eyes. He pushed a sheaf of papers across the desk, stopping them neatly right in front of me. They sat there, stark and white against the dark wood. "We've already had an offer on the house," Olivia said, her voice barely containing its triumph. "A private developer. They've been trying to acquire this land for years. Robert always said no, but the offer, it's more than we could have hoped for. Truly generational wealth." She said the last two words with a kind of religious reverence. "So," the lawyer said, his voice a dry rustle of paper, "to expedite the process, we have the listing agreement here and a durable power of attorney. If you just sign here and here," he tapped two yellow sticky flags with a manicured finger, "it will authorize David and Olivia to handle all the financial and legal matters regarding the estate. It's just simpler this way. Less for you to worry about during this difficult time." It was a perfectly packaged eviction, gift-wrapped in the language of love and concern. My son, my own flesh and blood, stood there, a willing accomplice, letting his wife and these two strangers dismantle my life right in front of me. He wouldn't meet my eyes because he knew. He knew what this was. He was Robert's son, after all. He understood power. He just didn't have the stomach to wield it himself, so he'd outsourced the dirty work to his wife. I looked down at the documents, the pristine white flag of my surrender. I saw the crisp, legal jargon, the neatly typed lines waiting for my signature. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been dormant for 50 years, shifted. The grief, the fear, the ingrained habit of obedience, it didn't vanish, but it was suddenly eclipsed by a flash of pure, cold rage. They hadn't just misjudged the real estate market. They had profoundly, catastrophically misjudged me. They saw a porcelain doll, a relic. A fragile old woman addled by grief, ready to be packed away in a box labeled Sea Breeze Senior Villas. They saw a line item on an estate ledger that needed to be liquidated. They didn't see a grieving widow, and they certainly didn't see a mother. I looked up from the papers, my gaze moving slowly from David's averted face to Olivia's expectant smirk, to the lawyer's predatory stillness. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like a doll. I felt like the shelf she'd been sitting on, about to collapse and bring everything crashing down with it. Robert's legacy wasn't just a son who saw me as a liability and a daughter-in-law who saw me as a speed bump on the road to a 9-figure payday. His legacy was also me, and I was a far more complicated acquisition than they could ever imagine. I didn't say a word. I simply pushed the papers back across the desk. The battle had been declared. Now it was time to plan my campaign. For 50 years, Robert's study had been a place I only entered to clean. It was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude, the door always closed. A scent of old leather, expensive cigars he rarely smoked, and a faint, chemical tang I could never identify clung to everything inside. But Robert was gone. The door was just a door now, and the house, by law and by sheer force of survival, was mine. Defiance felt like a foreign language, but I was beginning to learn the words. I walked in, not with a duster, but with a sense of trespass that was slowly, moment by moment, turning into ownership. My hand trailed over the spines of his books, hundreds of them, bound in dark green and oxblood leather, their gold leaf titles gleaming in the afternoon light slanting through the bay window. He had never read a single one. They were props, part of the grand stage design of his life, just like the obedient wife who arranged them. I was a prop. The thought wasn't new, but for the first time it didn't come with a sting of shame. It came with a cold, clear anger. My heel snagged on something. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of his massive mahogany desk. Looking down, I saw it. A single plank of the dark, polished hardwood floor, slightly raised along one edge. It wasn't a flaw in the construction. Robert would never have tolerated an imperfection. It was deliberate. My breath caught in my throat, a sudden, sharp hitch. My heart began to beat a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird wanting out. I knelt, my knees cracking in the silence. My fingers, trembling slightly, traced the outline of the board. It was loose. Of course it was. In a house where everything was controlled, locked down, and curated, this was the one thing out of place. I looked around for a tool. My eyes landed on the desk, on a heavy silver letter opener shaped like a miniature sword. How fitting. I wedged the tip into the seam and pried. The wood groaned in protest before giving way with a soft pop. There, nestled in a perfectly cut recess in the subfloor, was not a cache of love letters or a hidden diary filled with sentimental confessions. There was only a dull gray metal box, cool and impersonal. It looked like something from a military surplus store. It had a heavy-duty latch, but no lock. I lifted it out. It was heavier than I expected. My hands shook as I worked the latch, the click of it springing open echoing in the tomb-like quiet of the room. Inside, cushioned by dense black foam, were 3 sleek, black external hard drives. They looked alien and menacing, like polished stones from another world. Beside them lay a stack of small black notebooks, the kind you buy at a stationery store, Moleskine, I think they were called. Plain, unassuming. I picked one up. It wasn't a journal. There were no thoughts, no feelings. The pages were filled with neat, precise columns of Robert's familiar, sharp handwriting, lists, pages and pages of them. A name, followed by a date, then a long, alphanumeric string of characters, and beside that, a code that looked chillingly familiar, an accession number, the kind a museum uses to catalog its collection. The names were a roll call of the city's elite, people we'd hosted for dinner, people whose charities I had supported. The dates stretched back decades. I flipped through another ledger, same format, different names, different codes. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, washed over me. This wasn't a hobby. Robert's import-export business, the vague, respectable enterprise that had funded our perfect life, was a lie. This was his real work. This was the foundation of the sterling fortune. This was the secret I was never, ever meant to find. I closed the box, the sound of the latch clicking shut feeling like a final verdict. I slid the floorboard back into place, the fit so perfect, it was as if it had never been disturbed, but it had, and so had I. I hid the box in the bottom of my cedar chest, underneath a collection of my mother's quilts, a place no one would ever think to look. For a few days, I did nothing. I let the poison of that discovery seep into my bones, telling myself I needed time to think, to understand. But it wasn't thought I was seeking. It was a retreat. I was hiding. The habit of 50 years, of seeing something unpleasant and looking away, was a hard one to break. That hesitation, that deep-seated instinct to remain quiet, was a fatal mistake. Less than a week later, the doorbell chimed. It wasn't a friend or a neighbor with a casserole. It was a courier, a young man with a bored expression, holding out a crisp, legal-sized envelope. I signed for it, my hand strangely steady. Inside, the paper was thick, expensive, but the words were cheap. Cold, brutal, legal jargon designed to strip a person of their identity. David and Olivia had petitioned the court for a competency hearing. They were seeking conservatorship over me and my estate. I sank into an armchair, the letter rattling in my hand. They hadn't even had the decency to tell me to my face. They had used the law as their messenger. The petition was filled with phrases that felt like stones being thrown at me. Recent bereavement-induced confusion. Inability to act in her own best interests. Increasingly erratic behavior. They had taken my silence, my private grief, and twisted it into a medical diagnosis. My quiet walks in the garden were evidence of my disorientation. My refusal to immediately discuss selling the house was proof of my stubborn refusal to face reality. It was a masterpiece of cruelty, as meticulously crafted as one of Robert's forgeries. Robert had controlled me with silence and disapproval. Olivia and David were using a blunter instrument, the courts. They were going to have me declared a non-person, a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life, her own money, her own home, a problem to be managed and eventually put away. The Seabreeze Senior Villas. I could almost smell the antiseptic and hear the slow ticking clock. I was trapped. To fight this meant fighting my own son in a public courtroom. It meant subjecting myself to the humiliation of psychiatric evaluations, of having my life and my mind picked apart by strangers. It would be a slow, ugly, expensive battle, a war of attrition designed to drain my spirit and what little money I could access. That was their plan. To break me, just as Robert had. For 2 days, I existed in a fog of impotent rage and black despair. The legal papers sat on the kitchen table, a monument to their betrayal. Every option I considered led to a dead end. Call a lawyer. They had already retained the best probate attorney in the city, a shark named Marcus Thorne, whose name was on the letterhead. Plead with David. He wouldn't even answer my calls. I was utterly, completely alone, cornered by the people who were supposed to protect me. Then, in a moment of pure, raw desperation, when the walls of the silent house felt like they were closing in to crush me, a name surfaced in my mind. Leo, my grandson. I hadn't seen him in months. He was a ghost at family functions, always polite but distant, his eyes perpetually scanning his phone, a pair of oversized headphones usually around his neck. He was 20, a computer science major at Berkeley, more at home in the digital world of Twitch streams and Discord servers than in the stuffy, suffocating atmosphere of a Sterling family dinner. David and Olivia treated him with a kind of weary exasperation, dismissing his life as a frivolous waste of time. They didn't understand him, and they didn't try. Maybe, just maybe, he was the one person who wouldn't see me as a diagnosis on a legal form. My hand trembled as I dialed his number. I expected his voicemail. I expected him to be annoyed. I expected him to parrot his parents' carefully rehearsed concerns. He picked up on the third ring. Grandma? His voice was wary, surprised. Leo, I said, my own voice a dry whisper. I need your help. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just laid it out, the cold, hard facts of the petition, the words conservatorship and competency hearing, tasting like ash in my mouth. I expected him to interrupt, to offer platitudes, but he just listened. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, so profound I thought he might have hung up. Then, finally, he spoke. The single word was quiet, but it vibrated with a sudden, sharp anger that took my breath away. What? There was a pause, the sound of a sharp exhale. They're doing what? He said again, louder this time, the disbelief giving way to fury. That's insane. Are you okay? No, Leo, I'm not. I'll be there tomorrow, he said, no hesitation in his voice. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to them. I'm coming. He arrived the next afternoon, his beat-up Honda looking out of place in the long, curving driveway. He was taller than I remembered, lanky, with the same dark, unruly hair as his father, but his eyes were different. They were his mother's, before she'd learned to mask them with ambition. When he hugged me, it wasn't the perfunctory, air-kissing embrace of my son. It was real, a little awkward, but strong. He stepped back and looked at me, really looked at me, his gaze clear and searching. For the first time in years, I felt seen. They're monsters, Grandma, he said, his jaw tight. I led him to the kitchen and showed him the papers. He scanned them, his expression hardening with every line. Then I took a deep breath. There's more, I said. It's why they're doing this. It's not because they're concerned. It's because they're scared. I led him upstairs to my bedroom and retrieved the metal box. I set it on the bed between us and opened it. Leo leaned forward, his eyes widening as he saw the hard drives. He picked one up, turning it over in his hands, his fingers tracing the ports. Whoa, he breathed, a look of reverence on his face. Where did you get these? In your grandfather's study, hidden under the floor. He looked from the drives to me, a dozen questions in his eyes. He pulled his laptop from a worn canvas backpack, a machine covered in stickers for bands I'd never heard of, and slogans about open-source code. He plugged one of the drives in. A window popped up on his screen, demanding a password. It wasn't a simple login. It was a brutalist wall of code. Holy, he muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. Grandma, this is military-grade encryption. AES 256. This is the kind of stuff the NSA uses. What the hell was Grandpa doing? He looked up at me, and the last trace of the boy I remembered was gone. In his place was a young man staring at the challenge of a lifetime. A flicker of a smile touched his lips. This is a real-life quest. For the first time since Robert's funeral, a flicker of genuine hope sparked inside me. Leo wasn't just my grandson. He was a digital native, a code breaker, a soldier for a different kind of war. He was the one weapon in my arsenal that they would never see coming. While he worked, we fell into a strange, new domesticity. The house, which had been a mausoleum of silence, was now filled with the constant, quiet click-clack of his keyboard. He set up his command center in the guest room, his laptop surrounded by empty coffee mugs and crumpled snack food wrappers. I would bring him tea and sandwiches, and we would talk. He told me about his classes, about his online friends from around the world, who he felt closer to than his own parents. He talked about the pressure to follow in David's footsteps, to go into finance or law, a path that felt like a death sentence to him. He confessed his feeling of being an outsider in his own family, a bug in their perfect program. In sharing his story, he gave me the space to share mine. I told him about the loneliness, about Robert's quiet tyranny, about the feeling of being a porcelain doll locked in a glass case. A bond, fragile at first, but tempered by shared secrets and a common enemy, began to form in the long shadow of his grandfather's crimes. On the third day, after a marathon 36-hour session fueled by caffeine and sheer stubbornness, he finally broke through. I was dozing in an armchair in the corner of the room when a sharp intake of breath from him snapped me awake. "I'm in," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm past the first firewall." I went to stand behind him, my hand resting on his shoulder. The screen of his laptop was filled with neat rows of folders and files. My stomach churned with a sickening mix of dread and anticipation. The truth was right there, a click away. Leo's fingers flew across the trackpad, opening a folder labeled Acquisitions. Inside were subfolders, each named after a famous artist: Degas, Monet, Renoir, Cassatt. He clicked on Monet. A list of image files appeared. He opened one. On the screen was a photograph of the painting that had hung in our living room for 20 years, a beautiful waterscape of Giverny. But this photo was different. It was taken in a sterile white room with professional lighting, and in the corner was a small card with a date and a series of numbers. He opened another file. It was a detailed chemical analysis of the pigments. A third file was an invoice from a company in Belgium that specialized in art restoration and replication. The truth unspooled, file by horrifying file. Robert Sterling, the celebrated civic leader, the patron of the arts, had been running one of the most sophisticated art forgery and trafficking rings on the West Coast for over 30 years. His legitimate shipping company was the perfect cover, a global network for moving his illicit merchandise. Every priceless painting on our walls, the artworks that had been the backdrop to my entire life, were fakes. Brilliant, museum-quality forgeries, but fakes nonetheless. Leo found the blueprints for a hidden, climate-controlled vault built behind the back wall of the wine cellar. That's where the real ones were. The original Degas from the hallway, the real Monet from the living room, dozens of others, all stolen or swapped, waiting to be sold to a select clientele on the dark web. The names in the little black ledgers were his customers. I saw the name of a federal judge, a tech billionaire, a senator. It was a secret society of the rich and powerful, all complicit, all bound together by their shared crimes. The foundation of our family, the Sterling legacy, wasn't built on hard work. It was built on stolen beauty and grand larceny. My life hadn't just been a lie. It had been a crime scene. It took Leo another full day to crack the final folder. It was the most heavily protected of all, sealed behind 3 additional layers of security. It was labeled with just 2 letters, OV, Olivia's maiden initials. My blood ran cold. Leo looked at me, his expression grim. "Are you sure you want to see this?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He bypassed the last of the encryption, and the contents of the folder spilled onto the screen. It wasn't financial data. It was correspondence. Emails, contracts, encrypted chat logs dating back 6 years, long before David had ever met her. The story they had told us, a chance meeting at a charity gala, a whirlwind romance, was a lie. Every word of it. Robert hadn't met Olivia. He had recruited her. She had been a brilliant art historian at a prestigious university, on the fast track to a major museum curatorship, until a scandal involving a misattributed Renaissance sculpture had ruined her academic career. She was disgraced, desperate, and in debt. Robert offered her a way back. He gave her a new career. Olivia was his expert. She was his authenticator, his fence, his broker. The emails were chillingly professional. She would identify masterpieces in private collections or smaller museums, ones with lax security. She would assess the difficulty of the theft and the quality of the original. She would then oversee the creation of the forgery and, once the switch was made, broker the sale of the real piece to Robert's exclusive list of clients. She was the architect of his empire's most profitable era. And her marriage to my son? That was the masterstroke. A strategic merger. A business succession plan. It wasn't a love match. It was an acquisition. With Robert's health failing, he needed someone to take the reins. Olivia, with her expertise and utter lack of morality, was the perfect heir. David, my poor, foolish David, so blinded by his lifelong craving for a crumb of his father's approval, was nothing more than a pawn. He was the legitimate, respectable face for her illegitimate enterprise. The key to giving her the sterling name, and with it, control of the entire operation. The betrayal wasn't about money or art anymore. It was a monstrous, perverse conspiracy that had been playing out under my own roof for years. Olivia wasn't my grieving daughter-in-law. She was the new queen, and she had just tried to dispose of the one person who stood in her way. I looked from the cold, damning words on the screen to the legal petition still sitting on the table. The grief I had felt for my husband was gone, burned away by the acid of this truth. The pain of my son's betrayal was replaced by something else, something harder and colder. The porcelain doll was finally, irrevocably shattered. And in her place, something new and dangerous was beginning to take shape. The knowledge was a poison, seeping into the quiet corners of the house. It lived in the hard drives Leo had placed back in my sewing box, a silent, ticking bomb. Each file, each ledger entry, was a drop of venom. I could destroy them all with a single anonymous email. I could burn down the world Robert had built and watch Olivia, the usurper queen, choke on the ashes. But the fire would also consume my son, David. He was still my son, wasn't he? Blinded by a lifetime of worshipping a flawed man, blinded by an ambition he thought was his own, but was merely a reflection of his father's, and now, blinded by a grief that Olivia was expertly twisting to her own ends, I had to try, one last time, a mother's duty, or perhaps a fool's errand. I owed it to the boy he once was, the one who held my hand in the garden and asked me to name all the flowers. That boy was still in there, buried under layers of tailored suits and misplaced loyalty. I had to believe it. I picked up the phone, my hand steady despite the tremor in my soul. I invited him for tea, alone. I'd like to talk, David. Just the two of us, I'd said, my voice carefully pitched to sound fragile, lonely. He'd hesitated, and I could hear the faint, sharp whisper of Olivia in the background, coaching him, warning him, but he agreed. Perhaps some small part of him felt a pang of guilt, or perhaps he simply wanted to deliver the final blow in person. He arrived the next afternoon, the sun casting long, accusatory shadows across the living room floor. He sat stiffly in his father's favorite armchair, a place he now seemed to feel he'd earned the right to occupy. He looked so much like Robert, it was a physical blow, the set of his jaw, the impatient tapping of his fingers on the worn leather. I poured the tea, my hands moving with the practiced, graceful motions Robert had insisted upon for 50 years. The porcelain clinked, a sound that used to mean quiet domesticity, but now sounded like the chipping away of my own life. I didn't begin with forgeries or felonies. That would have been a wall he couldn't see over. I started softly, trying to plant a seed of doubt. David, I began, my voice low and even. I know this is difficult. Grieving your father. It changes everything. He nodded, his expression guarded. It does. And that's why Olivia and I are trying to handle things. To protect his legacy. To protect you. The word protect was a lie, a shield he held up to hide the sword. I appreciate that, I lied back. But your father, he was a complicated man. He kept things to himself. He left behind complications. His eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of complications? His finances were impeccable. Olivia has been over everything. She said it's a masterpiece of fiscal management. Of course she had. The thief was admiring the vault she'd been given the keys to. I'm not talking about money, not exactly. I'm talking about the way he operated, the way he controlled things. People. I leaned forward, trying to meet his gaze, trying to find my son. Olivia. She learned a lot from him. She is more involved in his business, in his legacy, than you know. She has her own ambitions, David. I'm just asking you to be careful, to look closer. It was a mistake. I had hoped to appeal to his reason, but I had only wounded his pride. He stared at me, and whatever softness was in his face hardened into a mask of contempt. A slow, cruel smile touched his lips. It was Robert's smile, the one he used just before he'd tell me how silly my opinions were. I knew it, he sneered, the sound ugly in the quiet room. I knew this was what it was about. You've always resented her. From the moment I brought her home. That's not true, David, I said, my voice starting to fray. Isn't it? He shot back, his voice rising. You never thought she was good enough, because she was smart, because she had a backbone, because she wasn't some wilting flower you could arrange in a vase. Dad saw her brilliance. He respected her. He saw her as an equal, something you never were to him. Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking a wound 50 years deep. Dad was a genius, he continued, his voice ringing with a fanatic's devotion. He built an empire from nothing. He was respected, he was powerful, and Olivia is the only one smart enough, the only one strong enough to protect that legacy, to build on it. He gestured wildly around the room, at the paintings on the walls, the beautiful, worthless lies. This, all of this, it's a testament to his greatness, and you want to tear it down. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor, the sound like a scream. He loomed over me, his face flushed with anger and a self-righteous certainty that was more terrifying than any rage. You're just a bitter old woman, he spat, the words landing with the force of a slap. You're angry because you can't control it anymore. Dad's gone, and his world is moving on without you, and you can't stand it. You want to poison me against her because she's the one in charge now. She's the one with the vision. The last vestige of my maternal hope, that fragile, stupid thing I'd been clinging to, shattered. It fell to the floor and turned to dust. The boy who loved flowers was gone. In his place stood a stranger, a man who looked at his mother and saw only an obstacle. He straightened his tie, a gesture of finality. The competency hearing is the best thing for you. It's for your own good. Olivia and I, we know what's best. For all of us. He turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, out of my life. He didn't look back. The front door closed with a heavy final thud. I sat there in the silence, the untouched teacup cold in my hands. He had made his choice. He had chosen the legacy of a criminal and the ambition of a con artist over his own mother. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The guilt, the sense of maternal duty that had been a heavy cloak on my shoulders for decades, simply dissolved. It evaporated, leaving behind not emptiness, but a cold, hard clarity, a diamond-like resolve. To save myself, I no longer had to save my son. I had to sacrifice him. The sun rose the next morning on a world that felt different. The air in the house was no longer heavy with grief, but sharp with purpose. I walked into Robert's study, a room I'd rarely entered without his permission, and picked up the phone. I called their lawyer, the slick, condescending man who spoke to me as if I were a child. This time, I didn't fight. I let my voice tremble, a perfect imitation of a broken, elderly woman. Mr. Albright, I began, a delicate catch in my throat. I've been thinking about what David said. Perhaps he's right. This is all too much for me. I could almost hear the man preen on the other end of the line. Mrs. Sterling, Elizabeth, I'm so glad you're seeing reason. It's a difficult time. David and Olivia only want what's best for you. I know, I whispered. I'm ready to cooperate. The conservatorship, selling the house. I'll agree to it all. I'm so tired of fighting. There was a pause, the sound of him shuffling papers, likely pulling out the documents for me to sign away my life. This is a very wise decision, Elizabeth, he said, his voice smooth as oil. We can have the papers drawn up immediately. Thank you, I said. And then I played my hand. There is just one more thing. A condition, if you will. A condition? His voice sharpened with suspicion. It's nothing, really. It's just sentimental. I let my voice crack. Before we sell the house, before everything changes, I want to host one final event here, a charity art auction, to honor Robert, to celebrate his memory, his love for the arts. It's what he would have wanted. The silence on the other end of the line was electric. I didn't need to see him to know what was happening. I could hear the gears turning in Olivia's mind, relayed through him. An auction, not some quiet estate sale, but a grand public event. A stage, her stage. It would be the perfect debut for her as the new doyenne of Port Blossom's art scene. She could glide through the rooms, the grieving daughter-in-law, now the capable custodian of a great collection. She could network, charm, and solidify her position with the very same wealthy, powerful clients whose names were listed in Robert's secret ledgers. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a display of vanity so profound it was a strategic weakness, and I was counting on it. Let me discuss this with Olivia and David, the lawyer said, his tone already softening. I'm sure they will see it as a beautiful tribute. He was wrong. They would see it as an opportunity. The call from Olivia came less than an hour later. Her voice was a symphony of false sympathy. Elizabeth, darling, she cooed, the sound like honey mixed with glass. Mr. Albright told us your idea. It's simply wonderful, so thoughtful. A perfect way to honor Robert's magnificent eye for art. I thought it would be fitting, I said, keeping my own voice small and frail. It's more than fitting, it's perfect. The glee in her voice was a current she couldn't suppress. Don't you worry about a thing, not a single thing. David and I will handle all the arrangements, the invitations, the auctioneer, the caterers. You just rest. We want this to be a beautiful evening for you to remember. Oh, it will be, I thought. It will be an evening no one in this city will ever forget. Thank you, Olivia, I said. That's very kind. Of course, darling, we're family. I hung up the phone, and a slow, cold smile touched my lips. It was not Robert's smile of condescension. It was my own. The bait was taken. The trap was set. The week leading up to the auction was a blur of clandestine activity, a silent, secret war waged from the heart of the enemy's camp. My life, which for 50 years had been a predictable, placid stream, became a rushing torrent of secrets and logistics. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, a conspirator in my plot. My first call was to Sarah, my oldest friend, a woman I'd met in a book club Robert had eventually pressured me into leaving. Sarah was a retired research librarian, a woman with a spine of steel hidden beneath a cardigan and a quiet demeanor. She'd spent her life navigating the intricate webs of information, a bloodhound for the truth. When I told her a carefully edited version of the story, that Robert had been involved in some shady dealings and Olivia was trying to steal my home, she didn't hesitate. That viper, she'd said, her voice thin with fury. I never liked the way she looked at your paintings, like a wolf looks at a sheep. What do you need, Elizabeth? I gave her the ledgers. We met in a quiet coffee shop in the next town over, passing the small, leather-bound books over the table like contraband. I need to know everything about these people, Sarah. Who they are, what they do, where their money comes from. Any whispers, any rumors, any connections. For the next 5 days, Sarah became my intelligence officer. She worked from her small book-filled apartment, her librarian skills honed to a razor's edge. She cross-referenced the names with business registries, society pages, old news articles, and the dark corners of the internet. She sent me daily updates in encrypted emails, painting a portrait of a shadow society, a network of Port Blossom's elite, bankers, judges, developers, all bound together by my husband's criminal enterprise. Meanwhile, Leo was my technical director. He arrived at the house under the guise of helping his grieving grandmother pack up some boxes. He came in with a duffel bag full of what he called toys, tiny, high-definition cameras, no bigger than the head of a screw, wireless microphones, a series of microcomputers that could route a signal anywhere in the world. He moved through the house with a quiet, focused intensity. "The main hall is the kill zone," he whispered to me one afternoon, his eyes scanning the ornate cornices and the crystal sconces on the walls. "This is where she'll give her speech. This is where the crowd will be." I watched, mesmerized, as he worked. He placed a camera lens in the center of a carved wooden rose on the mantelpiece. Another was hidden in the intricate metalwork of a chandelier. A third was disguised as a motion sensor for the alarm system we never used. He drilled a minuscule hole in a thick velvet curtain drape, fitting a microphone inside. He wired everything to a small, powerful server he hid in the back of my linen closet, tucked away behind stacks of yellowed sheets and lavender sachets. It was a professional surveillance operation, built inside my gilded cage. "It will all feed to a private live stream," he explained, showing me a link on his tablet. "We control when it goes public. When you give the signal, I'll blast this link, the hashtag, everything, to every platform that matters. Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. We'll send it directly to the news desks of the major networks. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be everywhere. It will be viral before the first guest can find their car keys." My task was the most crucial and the most deeply ironic. I became a forger myself. I told David and Olivia I needed the car to run some errands, to visit a friend. They agreed, happy to have me out of the house while their army of florists and caterers swarmed the place. But I didn't visit a friend. I drove 2 towns over to a specialty print shop that dealt with high-end architectural renderings and museum reproductions. I spent hours there, working with a young technician who thought I was a curator for a small private museum. I wasn't printing auction catalogs. I was creating masterpieces of accusation. I had Leo pull the most damning evidence from the hard drives. We selected pages from the ledgers, the elegant script of my husband's hand, listing a sale next to the name of a prominent city councilman. We chose a series of emails between Robert and Olivia, their language cold and clinical as they discussed a problematic provenance for a Monet and the logistics of a swap in a free port in Madrid. And most powerfully, we had the high-resolution photographs Leo had taken of the real masterpieces, stored in the climate-controlled vault hidden behind the wine cellar. The vibrant colors of the real Van Gogh next to a faded image of the forgery that hung in our library. At the print shop, I had these images blown up, printed on archival paper with a quality that was indistinguishable from a museum photograph. Each one was a bomb. Then came the placards. I wrote the text myself, spending an entire evening distilling complex crimes into cold, simple, declarative sentences. Exhibit A, Ledger Entry, August 2022. Transaction, Renoir, Jeune fille au chapeau garni de fleurs des champs. Client, Judge Alistair Finch. Note: a forgery was delivered to the client's home. The authentic piece was transferred to a holding facility in Geneva. This transaction coincided with the favorable ruling Judge Finch delivered in the Sterling zoning variance case. Exhibit B, Email Correspondence, January 2024. From R. Sterling to O. Sterling. Subject, Madrid. Content details a plan to substitute a stolen Degas sculpture for a commissioned replica during a gallery transfer, exploiting a gap in the security chain identified by Olivia. Each one was precise, factual, and utterly devastating. I had them mounted on thick black foam core, elegant and minimalist. They looked like art, the art of destruction. The day of the event arrived. The house was a whirlwind of activity. Caterers arranged trays of canapes, bartenders polished glasses, and florists placed enormous funereal arrangements of white lilies on every available surface. Olivia was in her element, directing the staff with the confidence of a seasoned general, while David trailed behind her, his face beaming with a proud, foolish love. They saw a stage being set for their coronation. They were blind to the gallows being built around them. I stayed in my room, feigning a headache, listening to the house transform. Late in the afternoon, after the caterers and florists had finally left and a deceptive quiet fell, Leo slipped into my room. "It's time," he said. We moved through the house like shadows. It was a silent, synchronized dance. Leo carried a small toolkit. I carried my stack of beautifully printed evidence. We went to the grand hall first. With methodical precision, we took down Robert's forgeries, the fake Monet, the fraudulent Chagall, the imitation Pissarro. Each one felt surprisingly light, as if its lack of authenticity gave it no weight. They were hollow, just like the life I had lived with them. In their place, we hung our exhibits. We used picture wire and levelers, spacing them perfectly along the silk-paneled walls. The ledger page implicating the judge went up where the serene landscape had been. The damning emails between Olivia and Robert replaced a portrait of a woman who never existed. The side-by-side comparison of the real Van Gogh and its pale imitation was hung over the fireplace, the place of honor, where it could not be missed. Each piece of evidence was accompanied by one of my stark, black-and-white placards. The room was no longer a gallery of fine art. It was a hall of indictment. By the time the first cars began to crunch on the gravel driveway, we were finished. Leo retreated to his command center in my linen closet. I went to my bedroom on the second floor, to the small balcony that overlooked the main hall. I put on a simple black dress, the one Robert had always hated, calling it drab. Tonight it felt like armor. I sat in a small chair, hidden in the shadows, and I waited for the curtain to rise. The house began to fill. The low hum of money and power vibrated through the floorboards. I saw them all arrive, the names from Sarah's research and Robert's ledgers brought to life. Judge Finch, with his booming laugh and self-important air. The developer, Marcus Thorne, who had built half the city on backroom deals. A dozen other faces, all pillars of the community, all rotten to the core. They greeted each other, sipped champagne, and admired the art on the walls, not yet realizing they were admiring their own ruin. Olivia was radiant. She wore a shimmering gold dress, moving through the crowd like a conquering queen, a glass of champagne held aloft like a scepter. She was the center of this universe, and she knew it. David stood beside her, a handsome, proud consort, his eyes shining with adoration for his brilliant wife. He would catch my eye, looking up toward the balcony, and give me a small, pitying smile, the smile one gives to a relic. The moment came. The chatter in the room subsided as Olivia tapped a spoon against her glass. She stepped to the small podium set up near the fireplace, directly under the framed evidence of her own treachery. She beamed at her audience, at her court. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice smooth and confident. "Welcome to our home. It means so much to David and me that you're all here tonight to honor the memory of a truly great man, Robert Sterling. He was more than a husband and a father. He was a visionary, a man whose passion for art has enriched all of our lives." As she spoke her rehearsed, hypocritical words, I gave a single, imperceptible nod. Leo, watching on his hidden camera feed, saw it. The lights in the hall dimmed. Olivia paused, momentarily confused. A spotlight was supposed to illuminate her. Instead, the large projection screen behind her, which was meant to display a rotating slideshow of Robert's collection, flickered to life. But it wasn't a painting of a French countryside that appeared. It was my face. I had recorded the video 2 days earlier, sitting in this very chair. On screen, my image was calm, my voice steady and clear as it echoed through the silent, cavernous hall. "Good evening," my video self said. "My name is Elizabeth Sterling. For 50 years this was my house. My husband, Robert, was a collector. He collected beautiful things." My image paused, letting the words hang in the air. But his most prized collection was not of art, but of secrets, your secrets. A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. Olivia had gone pale, staring at the screen in disbelief. Then the image on the screen changed. It cut from my face to a live feed of Leo's laptop screen, a dizzying, terrifying cascade of data. The contents of the hard drives, encrypted files being unlocked in real time, folders labeled with names, their names, transaction dates, bank transfers to offshore accounts. The raw, undeniable proof of a 30-year conspiracy. Simultaneously, with a series of quiet clicks, the spotlights in the hall shifted. They snapped away from the podium and, one by one, illuminated our exhibits on the walls. The first light hit the ledger page with Judge Finch's name. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, swept the room. Heads turned. The second spotlight hit the emails between Olivia and Robert. I saw Olivia's face crumble, the mask of the radiant queen shattering to reveal the terrified criminal beneath. The third light hit the side-by-side of the real Van Gogh and the fake. Panic began to erupt. A low murmur grew into a roar of shock and outrage. Guests were pointing at the walls, at each other. They saw their own names, their own complicity, framed and lit like a masterpiece in a gallery. Judge Finch looked as though he was having a heart attack. Marcus Thorne was already backing toward the door. And then, the final blow. Leo executed his last command. On his screen, I could see the notifications pop up. The private live stream was now public. A link, along with a single devastating hashtag, was pushed to every major social media platform. Hashtag Sterling unveiled. The phones came out. 100 tiny screens lit up the panicked faces in the crowd below. They weren't just seeing the evidence on the walls. They were seeing themselves in this room, on a live feed being broadcast to the entire world. They were exhibits in my museum of crime. I watched it all from the shadows of the upstairs balcony. The chaos, the fear, the dawning horror. I saw Olivia, frozen at the podium, a statue of ruin. I saw David, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending devastation, staring from the evidence on the walls to the wife he adored. The masterpiece of lies that Robert had spent a lifetime building and that Olivia had tried to claim as her own was shattered. It was over. A live, viral, public execution. And I was the one who had pulled the lever. The first siren was a faint, high-pitched whine, almost lost beneath the murmur of panicked guests. But it grew, a thread of sound weaving through the chaos, pulling a second and a third siren along with it until the night air was screaming. From the balcony, I had a god's-eye view of the world I had just shattered. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed across the manicured lawns, turning the pristine garden into a surreal, strobing nightmare. They sliced across the faces of the fleeing elite, painting them in the garish colors of guilt and terror. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. The tip, a simple, encrypted email sent by Leo from a burner laptop the second my face had appeared on that screen, had been brutally effective. It contained a single link to the live stream and the GPS coordinates for the house. That was all it took for the federal government to descend upon my party. The raid wasn't a chaotic brawl. It was a display of chilling efficiency. Dark-suited FBI agents moved with a calm, predatory grace, cutting through the throngs of people like sharks through a school of panicked fish. They weren't shouting. Their voices were low, firm, and inescapable. "Sir, we need you to stay right here." "Ma'am, please place your purse on the table." I watched them all. The venture capitalist who had laundered millions through Robert's Degas forgeries, his face slack with disbelief. The society doyen who traded insider information for a fake Monet, now trying to shrink behind a marble pillar, each one a pillar of the community, now crumbling under the weight of their own greed. And then I saw her, Olivia. My daughter-in-law, the aspiring queen of this stolen kingdom. 2 agents, a man and a woman, flanked her. She wasn't fighting. Her mask of poised elegance, the one she wore like a second skin, was still mostly in place, but it was cracking at the seams. A hairline fracture of fear at the corner of her mouth, a tremor in her perfectly manicured hands. As they placed the cold steel of the handcuffs around her wrists, her eyes swept the crowd, the house, the life she had schemed for, and for a second, they landed on me, standing in the shadows of the upstairs balcony. There was no hatred in that look. Not yet. There was only a flash of cold, reptilian calculation. An acknowledgement. Game recognizes game. Then they led her away, a masterpiece of ambition undone by a porcelain doll who had refused to remain on the shelf. The crowd thinned as agents escorted guest after guest to waiting black cars, not for arrest, but for questioning. The distinction was meaningless tonight. Reputations were hemorrhaging on my front lawn. The air, once thick with expensive perfume and self-congratulation, now smelled of damp earth and fear. And in the middle of it all, amidst the wreckage of shattered champagne flutes and scattered canapes, stood David, my son. He was a statue of devastation, a monument to a life built on lies. He looked so much like his father in that moment, but without any of Robert's cruel certainty. He was just lost, a man adrift in the ruins of his own inheritance. His gaze drifted aimlessly before it snagged on the upper floor, slowly, painfully, finding me. He saw me, the matriarch, the executioner, his mother. His face was a canvas of such raw, agonizing confusion that it almost broke the cold resolve in my chest. Disbelief warred with betrayal. Hurt fought with a dawning, horrified understanding. His mouth opened, a silent, ragged "oh," but no sound came out. What could he possibly say? Why? He knew why. He had to know. He had been so willing to believe I was losing my mind, so eager to cash in my life for his convenience, that he had never once stopped to ask if the woman he was marrying was anything more than a beautiful, ambitious surface. He had inherited his father's blindness, his inability to see the women in his life as anything more than accessories to his own ambition. I held his gaze. I let him see the 50 years of silence in my eyes. I let him see the strength I had hidden, the pain I had swallowed, the love I had been forced to hoard like a secret treasure. I felt a deep, aching chasm of sorrow open within me. Not for the man he had become, but for the little boy I once knew, the one who held my hand in the park and believed his mother was the strongest person in the world. That boy was the true casualty tonight. He had died long ago, and I had only just now managed to bury him. There was nothing left to say between us. Words were pointless now. They were the currency of the world that had just ended. After a long, silent moment that stretched into an eternity, I gave him the slightest, most imperceptible nod, a final acknowledgement, a final goodbye. Then I turned my back on the flashing lights and the ghost of my son and walked back into the deep shadows of the house, my house. The months that followed were a strange purgatory. The scandal of the Sterling collection was a media supernova, burning bright and hot for weeks. The name my husband had built, a name synonymous with quiet wealth and impeccable taste, was now a byword for the most audacious art fraud in modern history. My face was everywhere, but it was an old photograph, one Robert had approved of, where I looked serene and placid. The media narrative painted me as the tragic, oblivious widow, the final victim of the great Robert Sterling. They had no idea. I let them have their story. The truth was mine. My house, once a silent, gilded cage, became a federal command post. It was a bizarre invasion, but one I welcomed. Stern-faced men and women in sensible shoes walked the halls, their conversations a low hum of case files and evidence markers. They cataloged every piece of furniture, every book, every rug. They treated the house not as a home, but as a crime scene, which is what it had always been. The air, once stagnant with secrets, now crackled with the energy of discovery. I became an unlikely collaborator in the dismantling of my own life. I worked primarily with a senior agent named Miller, a woman with intelligent, tired eyes, who never treated me with pity. She saw me not as a fragile old woman, but as a witness, a resource. "The vault is behind the wine cellar," I told her one morning, leading her down the stone steps into the cool, damp air. My voice didn't tremble. "The combination is my birthday." The one thing Robert always pretended to forget. Agent Miller gave a small, wry smile. "The ironies never cease, do they, Mrs. Sterling?" "Call me Elizabeth," I said. "Mrs. Sterling is dead." The process of repatriating the art was a slow, meticulous ballet. I watched as masterpieces I had lived with for decades, masterpieces I now knew were stolen originals, were carefully documented, crated, and shipped away. A Vermeer that had hung in my dining room, a silent witness to countless tense family dinners, was returned to a museum in The Hague. A small, exquisite Monet, stolen from a Jewish family in Paris in 1941 and acquired by Robert in the 70s, was finally returned to the granddaughter of its rightful owner. I spoke to her on a video call, an old woman like me who cried as she saw the painting for the first time. With each piece that left, I felt the house grow lighter. The walls seemed to breathe again. I was not losing a collection. I was shedding a 50-year-old skin. I was exorcising the ghosts, one canvas at a time. I felt myself grow lighter, too. Olivia, ever the pragmatist, took a plea bargain. Faced with decades in a federal prison, she sang. She implicated everyone: the wealthy clients, the corrupt appraisers, the international smugglers. She gave the FBI the entire network, a 30-year criminal enterprise laid bare to save herself from a lifetime behind bars. I saw her on the news, walking out of a courthouse in a stark white pantsuit, her lawyer at her side. Her face was a mask of somber contrition, but her eyes, when the camera caught them, were as hard and empty as ever. She hadn't lost. She had just negotiated a different kind of victory. David was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing. He was a pawn, an ignorant fool, a fact the prosecution made painfully clear. The public humiliation was total. His name, his career, his marriage, all of it was incinerated in the blaze of the scandal. One day, about 3 months after the raid, I came downstairs to find his wing of the house unnervingly quiet. His things were gone. There was no note, no phone call, no final confrontation. He had simply vanished, moving to another state, another life, another identity, without a word of goodbye. I found a single framed photo left on his nightstand, face down. It was a picture of the three of us, Robert, David, and me, on a sailboat years ago. David was a teenager, smiling, caught between a father he could never please and a mother he never knew. I left it there. A small memorial to a family that had never really existed. My lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Anya, had advised me to sell the house. "Liquidate everything, Elizabeth," she'd said. "Start fresh, a smaller place, somewhere quiet." I considered it. I walked through the empty rooms, the walls now bearing pale rectangles where masterpieces once hung. The silence was different now. It wasn't the oppressive silence of Robert's control, but a vast, echoing emptiness. It should have been lonely, but it wasn't. It felt like conquered territory. Every room held a memory of my quiet rebellion, culminating in the final, spectacular victory. Selling it would feel like abandoning the field of battle. "No," I told Anya the next week. "I'm keeping it. It's not a home, but it's mine. I want it." It's late summer now. The air carries the scent of salt from the Pacific and the sweet, fading perfume of the rose garden. The house is finally quiet, cleansed. The last of the FBI agents left a month ago. The last of the stolen art is on its way to its rightful home. The house is just a house again, a shell, an echo. But it is an echo I control. Yesterday, I signed the final documents with Anya. The entire Sterling estate, this colossal house, the remaining legitimate assets, the stocks, the bonds, everything that was untainted by Robert's crimes, is no longer mine. It is now the property of a new foundation. The Phoenix Foundation. Its mission is twofold: to provide resources and legal aid for victims of covert psychological abuse, and to fund art restoration programs at underfunded museums. My inheritance wasn't the money or the house. It was the purpose I found in its ashes. My true legacy would not be the Sterling name, but the dismantling of it. Leo is visiting today, home for the weekend from college. We're sitting on the wide back porch, the same porch where I used to sit and watch Robert entertain his powerful friends, feeling like a ghost at my own party. Now, it feels like it belongs to me. We watch the sun dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. He's grown so much in the past year, not just taller, but deeper. There's a quiet confidence in him now. He pulls out his phone, a grin spreading across his face. "You're not going to believe this, Grandma," he says, his thumb swiping across the screen. He angles it towards me. It's a video on TikTok. A young woman with bright pink hair is excitedly recounting my story, using sound bites from news reports and photos from the disastrous auction. The video is edited with quick cuts and dramatic music. At the end, text flashes across the screen over a picture of me on the balcony. "Meet Elizabeth Sterling, the ultimate savage grandma." The video has 12 million views. A sound escapes my throat. It's a laugh. Not a polite titter, not the gentle, practiced laugh of Mrs. Robert Sterling. It's a real, deep, unbridled laugh that starts in my belly and spills out into the evening air. It feels new and slightly wild, the sound of a voice I haven't used in half a century. "Savage Grandma," I repeat, shaking my head, the laughter turning into tears that I don't bother to wipe away. "I suppose I am." Leo just smiles, puts his arm around my shoulder, and we sit in comfortable silence, watching the last sliver of sun disappear into the sea. After he leaves, the quiet of the house settles around me again. But tonight, it's a peaceful quiet, a hopeful quiet. I walk through the grand, empty halls, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors. I don't go to my bedroom. Instead, I walk to the far end of the West Wing, to a door I have not opened in 20 years. The art studio. Robert had it built for me as a wedding present, a grand gesture. "For my little artist," he'd said. It was filled with the best of everything. German easels, French paints, Italian brushes. And then he had locked the door and kept the key. He would show it off to guests. My wife's studio. She dabbles. But he never let me use it. My dabbling might have resulted in something that was truly my own, and he couldn't have that. It was the most exquisite room in my gilded cage. The door is unlocked now. I push it open. The air inside is thick with the ghost smells of linseed oil and turpentine. It's empty, of course. Olivia had sold all the pristine, unused supplies years ago. All that remains is a single, sturdy easel standing in the center of the room, bathed in the soft moonlight filtering through the skylight. It looks like a sentinel, waiting patiently. I walk to it. My hands trace the smooth, aged wood. On a nearby table, a single, shrink-wrapped canvas rests. A new one, delivered this morning at my request. I pick it up, tear away the plastic, and place the fresh, white canvas upon the easel. It is a perfect, luminous blank, an empty page, an unwritten future. For a moment, I just look at it. 50 years of suppressed creativity, of unspoken thoughts and unfelt emotions, swirl inside me. The fear is gone. The anger has cooled into resolve. The grief has settled into a quiet corner of my heart. All that's left is this vast, silent, brilliant emptiness. I turn and pick up a single, simple paintbrush left behind on the windowsill. I hold it in my hand. The wood is smooth and cool. It feels unfamiliar but right. A tool, not a decoration. I dip it into a jar of water and then into a small pot of black paint I bought myself at a small art supply store in town. I stand before the canvas. My canvas. In front of me is a future I never dared to imagine. A story that has yet to be told. And for the very first time, the hand holding the brush is my own. What do you think she painted first? A storm, a calm sea, or a single defiant bird taking flight? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to pick up their own brush, share this story with them.